everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I'm starting my July reading wrap-up today. My first finish of July was A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I had originally planned to read this in June but didn't get to it, and so finished it off in July. So this read was actually inspired by the 1995 film of the same name that I had watched obviously a long time ago. And I really loved The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and so I wanted to read this one and see if I liked it as much. And this story is set in London. I believe it's like early 20th century, potentially late 19th century. Hard to pinpoint it exactly. And Sarah Crewe is our protagonist. She was born in India, raised by her very doting father. Her mother died when she was born, I believe. And so her father is bringing her to London to a young girls' school, a boarding school, and then he will be going back to India. He's a soldier. He, is a colonizer in India, so he is prospecting and, doing his thing, and he wants his daughter to have an education. She is a very unique young woman, as most young women in this style of book are. So when was this written? Let me just tell you that, because perhaps that will have some sort of a play on what you can expect from this book. I mean, it's very much along the lines of Anne of Green Gables, Emily of New Moon, Little Women to a certain extent. It's got that same feel to it. So I'm not exactly sure what the date is for this, but it's very episodically told. So each chapter is kind of Sarah encountering, different characters. Some of them will be her friends, some of them will be her enemies. And she approaches life from a very dignified manner. So even when her fortunes change, she's very privileged when she arrives at the school. She gets the best room, she has, the fanciest clothes, but she doesn't have a spoiled personality. Her personality is very open and curious. And so when her fortunes change, that openness and curiosity is able to sustain her through a lot of hardship. And so that is what the story is. I think that it has a very typical kind of progression. I enjoyed it. I don't think I liked it as much as The Secret Garden. I would say that The Secret Garden is better. And I don't think I'll be reading any more of Frances Hodgson Burnett's novels. I think that, from the two, I got the gist of her style, and this isn't really a style of book that I gravitate towards necessarily, but I definitely will in the future reread The Secret Garden. I would like to I actually have 2 copies of this edition of the book. I bought a set of the Puffin Classics with this one in it, and I already had this one that I had gotten on a discount. And so I wanted to read this one and not my nice set, but I will probably pass this on to one of my nieces. But I think that this book, I'd like to get a copy of The Secret Garden that is lovely and similarly, hopefully similar to this, a Puffin Classic, or just a lovely copy, because I think I'd like to have a copy of that in my collection as well. Anything else to say about it? I don't really have anything else to say about it. I will be discussing this book along with a couple others in a Movie Made Me Read It video, probably at the end of this month or sometime in August or September. And I will talk more about the differences between the book and the film, then I need to rewatch the film because I haven't seen it in a very long time. But this is a book that is about magic in the sense of kindness and curiosity. I would say that if you can approach life with kindness and curiosity, things work out for you. Not necessarily always true, and definitely an example of, a class and colonial look at privilege. There's a lot of privilege in here, but also this kind of ideal of lifting. If you in the higher classes lift up those in the lower classes, then you're doing your good deed. So that's kind of like one of the big themes in this book as well. Okay, I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi everybody. I wanted to wrap up Why Women Grow by Alice Vincent with you this morning. So this was a great read, and it was an impulse buy, and I wanted to read it right away because I wanted to send it back east with my son, who's going to visit my family and work on the farm for the month of August. And I wanted to send it back east with him that he could take it to my mom, because my family has a lineage of gardeners in it, and my mom has been an avid gardener her whole life, and so I thought that she would enjoy reading this. So Alice Vincent is somebody that loves to grow a garden and loves plants, and she wanted to investigate the lineage of women's labor around gardening and how that has informed her understanding of herself, but also has given women this outlet throughout their lives, like what compels them to grow things, what kind of is the impetus for their gardens, but also what sustains them about their gardens. And she interviews lots of different women, most of them around England. So she names the different heads of the chapters after different areas that she's visiting. So she's traveling to meet women. She first sent out a survey. A lot of women filled out the survey. And then from that survey, she selects people to go and talk to more in depth in a green space of their choice. She also chose a few people that she followed, or some family members. And she also reflects on her own kind of emergence out of her young adulthood into her 30s, where she's contemplating marriage and children and transitioning out of the kind of breeziness of your 20s. She kind of refers to her 20s that way. And so I really enjoyed this. I think that it has a lot of beautiful descriptions of plants and gardens, and a lot of perspectives of different types of women and why they felt pulled towards gardening. There's political reflections around, access to land, how that affects your ability to garden, what that says about you, what that says about the system we live in and our culture. There is reflection of lineage, so women passing down this knowledge, and maybe also I think a really beautiful emphasis on this sense of reflection about your garden, because I think one thing about gardening for me is it's very instinctive. I don't reflect on it very much, or about why I do it or what compels me to do it. And in the last few years this is my second summer in a new garden, and the thing that I miss the most from my previous home is the garden that I established there. It was a very small garden. It wasn't very big, but it became this beautiful thing that I had, sustained and created and given space to. And now I'm creating a new space for that. And so it takes time. It's a long process to grow a garden. It's not fast. And it evolves and changes, and you'll put something somewhere and then it doesn't work and you have to move it or you have to replace it with something else. And so it's like a lot of trial and error and building and time and waiting and patience. And so I thought this was great. Very it gave me a lot to think about, thinking about the lineage of my own family of gardening. And I really loved it. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in books about women's labor, lineage of gardening, and if you are interested in plants and gardening yourself. All right, I'll check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi everyone. I finished Unsettling Canadian Art History, edited by Erin Morton, this morning. And I wanted to specifically mention it here because this book doesn't have any reviews on Goodreads. So I wanted to make sure that it has some sort of a reference for anyone looking at it in the future. This is a really important compilation of essays by a lot of different people trying to comment on art history and Canadian settler colonialism, and how the dialogues in art history have addressed with various failings the settler colonial agenda. There are essays in here around LGBTQ plus, Indigenous and Black histories, and artists who are actively working towards challenging the establishment, basically. My only criticism of this book is that the introduction by Erin Morton I found to be really challenging to read. It was very cerebral and dense, and I was a little bit uncertain as to why she wrote it with such, like, I would say it's very academic leaning and also rather inaccessible. And I would say I read enough art history texts and enough criticism and things like that to have a fairly good vocabulary around this type of writing. And I just found that, if an average person was trying to read that introduction, it would definitely, to me, turn them off the book. The rest of the essays are much more accessible. So I wasn't sure why she wrote it in that way. And I almost didn't finish reading this book because it was so dense to read the introduction that I kind of wanted to stop, even though I did pull some quotes from the introduction. So it's not like I think the introduction isn't worth reading. I think it is worth reading, but it's just the way it was written was really challenging to get through. So again, a really important text covering some artists that are doing some work that I think it does challenge the canon and challenges how artists are perceived in a settler colonial state. So check it out if you are looking for something like that. Okay, I'll check in again with you when I finish another book. Hi everyone. I wanted to wrap up Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. This was my audiobook for the month of July. And this is a science book written by the wonderful researcher Suzanne Simard, who was basically responsible for discovering the interconnected web in forests. So, her research led to proof that trees communicate, that they feed each other. The mother tree being like her biggest discovery, at the point where she realized that these mother trees were feeding all the little baby trees and were giving them the things they needed to survive and to thrive. And she came to this through working in the logging industry, trying to figure out why the seedlings that they were planting after they had clear-cut forests were not surviving or were not thriving. And so her research kind of devolved from there. what I found so interesting about this science book was that she really integrated her story into it. So the story of her life, the story of her family, her childhood, her siblings, her meeting her partner, having her own children. So all of this is kind of integrated into her science. And for me, being someone that doesn't usually read science books and who is not really interested in the specific science details, but really wants to hear more about the the life of a scientist and the process through which she made these discoveries, it was perfect. I found that, I think if you're more into science reading and you like the details are in there. But if you are more into a broader sense of the importance of her work, but not needing all the minutiae of like the details, you get enough of the other side to satisfy you. I also really enjoyed how she breaks down the scientific process, like the academic scientific process of doing your experiments, analyzing the data from the experiments, processing that into a paper, submitting it to a journal, the journal publishing, and then people sending in rebuttals, and then you having to, or people sending in, I don't know if that's called a rebuttal. Anyway, people will send in their objections to or their questions about your research, and then you look at that, and then you send your rebuttal to their criticism. That was really interesting to me because I wasn't aware of that process and like how that works. And the fact that Suzanne Simard broke that down for everyone, really demystified the scientific process and brought you inside the world. And she was a woman working in a highly male dominated field. There's a lot of sexism that came out of that, and she doesn't dwell on that in any way. Maybe in some ways she dwells on it too little. I would have thought that she would have called it out more, but she really wanted to focus on creating connection and sticking to the science rather than going down into the socio-political reasons for potentially for male scientists to be dismissive of her work. And she also battles cancer in there. So it's a really full book. I would say it's a science book that weaves memoir in to me really well. I really enjoyed it. I know some people don't like personal detail in these types of books, but I think if you want to read something that's just her science, then you get the scientific journal and you read that. But this is about her life and her personal story and how it has created and led to her work, like how her life has fed her work and how she came to these ideas, like where her ideas for some of her experiments came from. Super interesting. So I really enjoyed it. I listened to a talk with Suzanne Simard. She's actually a professor at University of British Columbia. I listened to a talk where she was promoting her newest book, which I think might be called When the Forest Breathes or something like that, which I will read eventually. I did enjoy, I wanted to read Finding the Mother Tree first or listen to it and see if I liked her writing, and then I would continue, and I did like it enough that I think I would read her next book. Eventually. So really glad that I read that, and I will check in again with you when I've finished another book. Hey everybody. All right, so I just finished Dual Citizens by Alix Ohlin. And this is a novel. Alix Ohlin is a Canadian writer. And this book was on the one of the finalists for the Giller Prize, and I'm not sure if it was in 2020. It was published in 2019. So I was just reading some reviews of this, and I feel like I really liked this book. I really loved it, actually. I did give it 5 stars, but I do understand why other people won't like it. And I think that, on the surface, this is about 2 sisters who have a very disengaged mother. Her mother has her children with 2 different men, 4 years apart, 16 and 20 years old when she gives birth to them. They each have bird names, so we have Lark and Robin. And they grew up in Montreal, and their mother is constantly trying to find a man, bringing different men home that they feel they have to perform for. And so they become bonded as sisters. And Lark feels that Robin is better than her, is prettier than her, is smarter than her, is more interesting than her. But she always feels this care, and she takes care of Robin and wants to protect Robin and make anything happen for Robin. So Lark is this very ambiguous character. She doesn't have a lot of defining characteristics, and she goes through the first part of her life very much with that in mind, like Robin always being the kind of shining one and Lark being the kind of backup character. And then the plot ensues from there. There's not a lot of plot in this book because this book is about a sister relationship. It's about these sisters. It's about their bond. It's about their dedication to each other. It's about them each seeking freedom in a way. Lark is a slow developer. She kind of latches onto others and defines herself through others for most of her life. And then when she's able to make different choices out of an instinct that comes up in her, she then starts asserting more of who she is. But, she is a character that I feel like both of them are not necessarily likable characters. None of the characters in this book are likable, but I liked all of them. I liked the way Alix Ohlin drew them, and I loved the way she advanced the plot, because I think in a book like this, there are some typical tropes that authors will go to. Love triangles are very popular when you're talking about sisters. Inserting kind of love interests or lovers into damage the relationship between the sisters. And Alix Ohlin did not resort to any of those things. These 2 women are extremely self-possessed. So even though they make decisions based on sometimes on the men in their lives that you may not agree with, they have this interior sense of self, this independence, and sometimes that's just an independence based on circumstance rather than choice. But that independence was fascinating to me to read. I maybe I'm the opposite of most women my age. I'm not really interested in reading about women falling in love all the time and making their love relationship the main focus of their life. And so this book to me showed it was a family saga in some ways. So it's about the sisters, it's about their relationship with their mother and her life, and it's about their work. And so in that way, it reminded me of Painter's Time by Kerangal a lot, which again, I think is a style of book that divides a lot of people because a lot of people aren't interested in learning about people's work. But I am, and I found it interesting. Lark works as an editor. She works for a famous documentary filmmaker. And she talks about her work. She talks about the things she does for the filmmaker, the skills she builds. She translates those skills into, becoming a reality TV editor, which was really interesting because you can kind of set the clock of like the timeline of this by that. So it's like, mid 2010s, she's like editing films in New York. And Robin is very much a free spirit, a child prodigy with the piano, but that doesn't work out for her. And so she ends up, creating a life for herself that is very unusual, but very satisfying to her. And so those lives are described, their passions are described, their way of constructing their lives differently from, the typical suburban, partner and kids and dog life is described. And I found that fascinating. There's also a really great group of supporting characters in this book. People they met when they were younger who continue to show up in their lives, people who, are periphery, but who spark things in them, challenge them, support them, inspire them. This was really good. I really enjoyed it. But like I said, if you like books with a lot of action, I wouldn't necessarily, although for me as a character-based reader, I did think there was quite a bit of plot in here. So some of the people who are criticizing the plot, I'm not exactly sure what they have a problem with in terms of how the plot progresses. But it's about two people who are growing up, coming of age, living their lives, becoming adults, making adult decisions, who don't dwell a lot on self-pity or try to change those around them that much. They just try to accept the people around them for who they are and live together and coexist in this. And it feels very human to me. It feels very, there's enough of it that is kind of unique, and a few things you have to suspend disbelief a little bit about, but ultimately it feels like a human grounded story about the relationship between these sisters and how they made it through and the way they negotiate their relationship to each other. And that's the primary relationship. So if you're interested in female relationships that are platonic, so we're not talking about a love relationship, like a romantic love relationship, we're talking about half sisters, and their mother I would put in there as well. Then you might enjoy this. But I thought this was really good. I'm really glad I read it. And I am going to try to finish one more book before the end of this video. So this is either the end, and thank you so much for watching, or there's going to be one more clip. So thank you so much for watching regardless. Hi, everybody. All right, so I finished my last book of July, which was Moon of the Turning Leaves by Waubgeshig Rice, and I really enjoyed this. So this is a sequel to his novel Moon of the Crusted Snow, and he created a world here where we have a undetermined apocalyptic situation. So the world has collapsed. The world as we know it has collapsed. There's no more communication, there's no more telephones, there's no more satellites, there's no more power. Like, it all goes down. The grids just go down. There's some sort of light phenomena that happens in the sky, and then everything just collapses. And the first book establishes this community who are living on a reservation in Northern Ontario, and they protect themselves from kind of, the kind of potentially inevitable backlash that happens during a situation like this, where there are people who become militant, there are people who become desperate and greedy and all those things, and they go off and establish a settlement. And that is, the first novel. In the second novel, they have lived in this settlement for 10 years. They are depleting their resources. They have sent out a few search parties in the past to try to figure out what else is happening in the rest of the province, in the countryside around them, and none of those people have returned. And so they are getting to a place of desperation where they think, we have to find something else. So they send a party south to go to try to find their homelands. So just a brief, history lesson here. A lot of First Nations and Indigenous peoples in Canada were displaced. So this community's original homelands were not where they were left after the apocalyptic event. They were relocated. They had probably been relocated in that area for 100 years. And now they thought, we should try to go back to our original land. And so that is where they're pursuing. It's a group of 5 that leave. These types of stories are really great stories for me. I love adventure traveling stories where they are traveling by foot. They're encountering a lot of obstacles along the way, and they have to try to get to this destination. This story does not disappoint. It has action. It has, the only thing I would say about it that sometimes I felt didn't need to be in there was the kind of description of the derelict buildings, the towns that are deserted. Because I think once you've had a description of one of these towns, they all pretty much sound the same. So to describe them multiple times in multiple areas is not really necessary for me. So that's the only criticism I'd have with this book. Maybe there was one too many times where that was described, but otherwise you have a core group of characters that you follow. Not every character is developed equally, but you definitely feel attached to the characters, and I cared about what happened to them throughout the story. So I would say, this is a great novel. You don't have to read Moon of the Crusted Snow to read this. But for me, as a character reader, I would say definitely read Moon of the Crusted Snow, because then you're more attached to one of the main characters whose journey happens in this book. And you want that connection in order, I think, to get the full emotional impact of the story. But yeah, really enjoyed this, would highly recommend. And that is my reading for the month of July. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.